for our, okay, great. Just want to get our recording started. Just wanted to welcome you all to our April Wisdom Wednesday. We are so pleased to have you. We are joined this evening with Dr. Abena Brown El-Hilali. And before we get started, we would like to always welcome everyone who's checking in. So we do ask that you let us know where you are checking in from. So please drop your city in the chat so we can give you a shout out. And starting us off, we want to say welcome to our family checking in from New Jersey. We have Patterson, New Jersey, Atlanta, Georgia, Lawrenceville, Georgia. Welcome. We have DC, of course, in the house, Chesapeake, Virginia, Atlanta again, Leland, North Carolina, Washington, D.C., Inglewood, California. Welcome, Cali. Atlanta's in the house heavy. Alexandria, D.C., of course, is in the house heavy. Thank you so much. Okay, the cities are popping on in. So as you all come in, we do say thank you and welcome for joining us and spending this evening with us. For those of you who may be new, IKG is a cultural organization based here in Washington, D.C., where we aim to provide information on African culture, history, and Wisdom Wednesday is a part of that effort, where we have a free monthly lecture series where we present speakers who speak on various topics related to African Black history, culture, education, health, wellness. And tonight will be no different. And before we get started, I would like to say that we invite you to go to our website, ikgculturalresourcecenter.com, where you can learn more about the programming that we offer, as well as our field trip season, Egypt on the Potomac field trip. It is an opportunity to learn how ancient Egypt, masonry, influences the layout of Washington, D.C. So it's a great field trip that you don't want to miss. And our season for 2024 is now open. Want to give a few more shout outs before we get started. So we have Upper Marlboro, Maryland. Okay, we have Ghana checking in, Richmond, Virginia. So much love, much love. Thank you. So for tonight's program, we are so pleased to have Dr. Abena Brown El-Hilali back again, speaking on mental wellness for Black women in America. Abena writes, the history of racism and dehumanization of African descendants is woven into the foundational fabric of the United States. While the sacrifices of Black leaders and pioneers have led to more opportunities for change and progress, the fundamental principles of racism in the United States remain the same. Current health disparities in the United States illustrate that regardless of wealth or educational level, race continues to predict the health outcomes for all. In this presentation tonight, she will focus primarily on the mental wellness of Black women in America. She will explore the unique challenges Black women face in establishing and maintaining mental wellness. This presentation will also include an interactive discussion on integrative strategies to improve mental health in Black women. And now a little bit about our speaker. Dr. Abena Brown is a licensed clinical psychologist and registered yoga teacher with 20 years of experience working with children and families. She is the founder and lead clinician of Safe Space for Family Healing, an integrative and trauma-informed practice focused on mental wellness for Black families. Dr. Abena is a native Washingtonian and received her doctorate in clinical psychology from Howard University. Her clinical expertise includes the use of mind-body strategies to manage stress and treat trauma. Dr. Abena dedicates much of her clinical time to educating families and communities on trauma, resilience, and growth. When not engaged in clinical work, Dr. Abena enjoys exploring local parks and beaches with her family and gardening. So welcome, Dr. Abena Brown and Halala. We are so pleased to have you. And we are going to turn it over to you. And family, by the way, we do ask that it will be an engaging conversation. So get your fingers ready to type in your responses. And any questions that you have for our presenter, please post those specific questions in the Q&A box. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sister. Ajwa, you know, you're my sister, and I definitely appreciate this opportunity to present to the community. The last time I did this, I was just so thrilled to have the opportunity and to be able to really connect. So I'm really hoping to connect again tonight, and again to make this an interactive conversation about mental wellness for Black women in America. Okay, so I'm going to get my slides up here, and then we can get started. Okay. Okay. We should be sharing slides here now.
Yes.
All right, perfect. Okay, so I got that wonderful introduction, but I'm going to give you a little visual here so that you can get the visual about me and get some context about where I'm coming from as I talk about this topic. I am proudly from Washington, D.C. You might recognize this gentleman here, Chuck Brown, performing here in the nation's capital. I am a person who was born and raised in a very Afrocentric household. My parents are active in the African-centered community and definitely instilled these values in me. But still, I'm a DC girl at heart. Those two things go together perfectly. I still love go-go, still love being an African person. And then also, of course, I was blessed to receive my graduate and undergraduate degrees at Howard University, where I was a student of Dr. Jules Harrell, who has studied race and racism quite widely. And by taking his classes, I began studying his work and learning how racism affects our psychophysiology. So understanding how the experience of racism affects our stress levels, affects our blood pressure, and ends up affecting our health. After graduating, I worked in mostly predominantly white institutions and learned firsthand what it feels like to be the only Black person in the room, but also had the opportunity to learn more about using yoga for mental wellness. Again, there's a flag of Antigua here. My father's family is from the Caribbean. That's definitely part of my heritage. And then lastly here, I have the logo for Safe Space for Family Healing. And this is the private practice that I developed in 2019, where I'm able to provide affirming care for Black women with the goal of healing families and communities one person at a time. And about 90% of the clients that we work with are Black women. So that's me, so you know where I'm coming from here. So all due respect to every member of the Black family, our men, our boys, our children. But this evening, I ask you to take some time just to focus on Black women. And I ask for a few minutes that you just reflect on the Black woman that you have known. If you were fortunate enough to know your mother, your grandmother, your great-grandmother, your aunts, great aunts. And in the process, ask that you begin by reflecting on who they were to you, and also imagine standing in their shoes from birth, growing up, to puberty, to young adulthood, learning who they were, finding a way in life for themselves, and imagining what life must have been like for them in their respective time periods. So these are some of the words that have come up as I reflect. And in the chat, if you can, think about which words come up for you as you reflect. If it's the same thing or something different. So we've got strength, love, caring, nurturing. Thank you. Absolutely. Definitely love, definitely nurturing. So the intersections of race and gender and the history of racism in the United States creates a very unique challenge for Black women and our mental health. We're exposed to images of sexual and racial violence from a very young age. And this includes violence towards Black men, Black children, and definitely Black women. Young Black girls are sexualized at young ages and expected to act way older than they actually are, not given the time to grow up. As Black girls and women, we're expected to carry on, to internalize, compartmentalize, which we're pretty good at, and to keep going, all while functioning at times in toxic school and toxic work environments. For most of us, quitting is not an option. We either think we have to maintain to support our families, because that's the reality, to reach our goals, and to meet the expectations of others who are counting on us. Our efforts to function in these environments is leading to self-neglect. And self-neglect ends up being both a coping skill and a consequence of our circumstances. Self-neglect becomes a coping skill because honestly, when we're busying ourselves with the priorities of other people, sometimes it feels much easier than managing our own needs. So focusing on what everybody else has going on is a welcome distraction to help us to not think about what's going on underneath. And it seems a lot easier sometimes. And self-neglect becomes a consequence, of course, when we intend to take the time for ourselves, always meaning to make that appointment, meaning to take that time off. But of course, there's so much going on that we never really get around to taking care of ourselves. So our efforts to function in these environments is really having a toll on our health. And survival is really becoming the priority. We're no longer really prioritizing wellness, okay? So this topic is important for lots of different reasons, of course, but when we are prioritizing the mental wealth and mental health of Black women, we are prioritizing the well-being of our mothers, our daughters, our sisters, our partners, and of course, our future leaders. So I'm going to give you a quick warning about some of these images that are going to follow. And I think I might have missed a few chats. So strength, nurturing under duress, absolutely. Resilience, loving, strong, and giving. Absolutely. Thank you for that. Okay. So here we go. This presentation really stands on the premise that much of the challenges that we face in maintaining our mental and physical health are a direct result of living or trying to live in a system that is constantly working to convince us that we are something that we are not. So this image is representing what the founders of this country, and thus the current systems of this country, want us to be. What they hoped we would be, what they expected us to be, and what they wanted to reduce us to. Shadow bodies bought and traded and breeded and used at their disposal. Is another example of what they expected us to be. In servitude, to nurture and to nourish as commanded, at the expense of not having the opportunity to nurture and nourish our own children and families. Through the establishment of the United States, we've been expected to be the backbone on which this country's economy was built, in perpetual servitude and inferior. Who we actually are is a vast deviation from what they expected and what was hoped. And what was hoped in order to continually build wealth through our free labor and dehumanization. Our existence is such a deviation that we are literally rocking the world and disrupting these established systems of white supremacy and sexism. They definitely still exist, but our existence in our natural forms, just showing up as we are, is causing lots of uncomfortable incongruency and cognitive dissonance for the systems that we live in. So take a look at these images, because of course, I'm sure you all are familiar with them. The irony and the paradox is that the Black woman, who was really expected to be the source of perpetual labor, are now in the positions to hold people accountable when America is not standing up for the standards it set for itself. This whole idea of justice and liberty that was never really meant for us is now being upheld by us. So starting at the top, we have Claudine Gay, the former first African-American female president of Harvard University, who decided to step down after much controversy. Ketanji Brown Jackson, the first Supreme Court justice, who is an African-American woman. Fani Willis, who is giving folks hell, prosecutor from down in Georgia, much deserved hell. Letitia James, prosecutor from New York, and of course, Stacey Abrams, former Georgia House of Representative, and Michelle Obama. So there's so many others, of course, who would be appropriate to list here, both historically and currently. So I want to come back to this image for a bit and talk about it. This is not the original image. This white sticker right in the center is a little modesty sticker that I added on my own just to be sensitive of the audience, but you can find this original picture if you want to. The title of the photograph is From Her Body Came Their Greatest Wealth by Nona Faustine. She's a photographer from Brooklyn, New York. And this is part of her White Shoes series, where she wears white shoes and poses nude in historical areas of New York, where slavery and slave trading took place. So I'm going to read you an excerpt from the artist. What does a Black person look like today in those places where Africans were once sold a century and a half ago? What is it like to be naked, that vulnerable, on display to the world, on the slave block or in the fields, to stand in the exact spot where they sold African men, women, and children 150 years ago? I stood at the Canyon of Money, the place that not only got its name from the African slaves that built the Wall of Wall Street, but whose first commodity was those very human beings. Standing before the camera, trying to conjure for myself what this might have felt like. Human beings sold to the highest bidder and knowing that this is not who I am. I am more than what you see. How many great minds were imprisoned, sold, and reduced to the status of a horse, mule, or cow? I thought of the great potential lost in each instance, the great artists, the brilliant scholars, the writers, princesses and princes, philosophers, teachers, architects, inventors, and scientists, people who could have contributed to society in a myriad of incredible ways. And here we are. So again, we have been expected to be the backbone on which the American economy was built. And much of our difficulty with mental wellness is a result of our efforts to function in a system where we are expected to be something that we are not. We're not fitting in the boxes that have been expected and created for us. And we are also expected to both learn in educational systems and work in racist systems and environments where confusion, anxiety, and burnout are both intentional and inevitable. But as a result, ultimately, our mental and physical health are negatively impacted. And this in turn is affecting our abilities to care for ourselves, for our children, and to build health and wealth for our future generations. If we can't be healthy, neither can our future generations. Black women are 2.6 times more likely to die from pregnancy-related complications than white women. There's been lots of talk about this because it really doesn't even matter who you are. Even the famous of us are suffering in this way. We're all at risk. For Black women 25 and older, pregnancy-related mortality is about 4 times higher than it is for white women of similar ages. And Black women have shorter life expectancies. It's 77 versus 81 years old for non-Hispanic white women. And Black women compared to Black men are 1.8 times more likely to report sadness and 2.4 more times to report hopelessness most or all of the time. So what's most surprising is the suicide death rates for Black adolescent girls rose a whopping 182%, 182% between 2001 and 2017. And for Black females, grades 9 to 12, they were 60% more likely to attempt suicide in 2019 compared to non-Hispanic white females of the same age. What's more eye-opening is the fact that our socioeconomic status does not protect us. It does not matter if we're making money, if we feel like we've made it, if we are well employed, because Black women are not benefiting from the higher SES the same way that white women do. Meaning that even for Black women with wealth, we are more likely to have negative health outcomes compared to white women with wealth. So how is this actually happening? How is it that we end up having these negative health outcomes? This is a visual from the Adverse Childhood Experiences Study. It's conducted by the Kaiser Foundation, which collected longitudinal data from 1995 to 1997, and it tracked the health outcomes and the correlations between health, longevity, and experiences that we have in our youth with what we call adverse childhood experiences. This is one of the largest studies of its kind. There's still studies that are coming out of this data. And what we're looking at here is how stress and trauma that we experience early in life, as well as the historical trauma that has happened before we were even born, are impacting our environments and also impacting our ability to manage stress. So at the base of the triangle, before even considering things that happen in our childhood, are the historical and generational traumas and embodiment. So I'd like to add, this came from the CDC. The CDC published some of this data, and this particular figure came directly from the CDC. What happens even before we were born is affecting us. And then what comes next are the social and environmental context, including the systems that we live in, which, as we have discussed, look very different for Black women. Life for Black women and the experiences that we have are completely unique. And then comes the adverse childhood experiences that many of us face in life. Some of these experiences include recurrent physical abuse, emotional abuse, having alcohol and/or a drug abuser in the household, having an incarcerated family member, having someone who's chronically depressed or mentally ill or institutionalized, losing one or both parents, and emotional or physical neglect. So these are things that are just happening to people as life happens. But the study found a very powerful relationship between our emotional experiences as children and our physical and mental health as adults. So simply put, the more of these ACEs that we experience, excuse me, the more challenges that we're going to have with health and longevity. And some of us can kind of look at these and recognize a few of them that have happened to us or people that we know. They happen to everyone. But the link here are the health risk behaviors that we adopt. How do we actually manage the stressors that we are experiencing? And that's what looks very different. The higher the ACE score, the higher number of adverse childhood experiences, the study found, the more likely we were to contract heart disease, diabetes, obesity, unintended pregnancies, STDs, and alcoholism. All of these things were very highly correlated. But the health risk behaviors and how we deal with stress is really the issue. And we can kind of think about these for ourselves, how we are managing stress in the maladaptive ways. It looks like how we eat and how we tend to have trouble sometimes eating healthily when we're under stress, how we have trouble caring for ourselves, how sometimes substances are used as a maladaptive way of dealing with stress, and again, not prioritizing our mental and physical health. Okay. So these are the health disparities that we're looking at and what we see. What is it that is missing? What do you all see here that you have noticed for our communities that you don't necessarily see here when it comes to negative health outcomes? Mm-hmm. You can just throw it into the chat. Racism, microaggressions. Yeah, absolutely. And all of these are contributing to our ability to manage stress. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about a Black woman in real life. So this is an example of a typical presentation of the clients that I have the pleasure and opportunity to work with. And when I go back, somebody said qualified health providers that look like us. And that is a really important factor in all of this, because having qualified providers who look like us can either encourage us or discourage us from getting the care that we need, often feeling that we're going to be misunderstood, misdiagnosed. And if that's what we believe, then why go to the doctor anyway? And systemic abuse in families. Thank you for that. So this is an example of a typical presentation for the clients that I have the pleasure to work with. This is not the description of one client, but a combination of common factors that are present in many of the clients that we see. These Black women are high achievers, well-educated, capable, usually over-functioning. They have very high standards for themselves. They're goal-oriented, and they're working to process and move past family trauma. Many of us are very much aware of our family traumas, but we just don't know how to move past them, along with dealing with life as it is right now. So they're working to process and move past family trauma, and at the same time, still wanting to start a family or working really hard to support their families, and also trying to balance caring for their family and excelling at work. So clients are often reporting past family trauma, stressful work environments, of course, because even in non-predominantly white institutions, work can be stressful. And some health concerns. Lots of people are showing physiological manifestations of what's happening emotionally, as well as sadness and anxiety. And the goals that we're often looking at are improving work-life balance, setting boundaries with family, and focusing on wellness and physical health and reducing stress. So how do we do this? So my job as a psychologist and as a therapist is basically to support us, specifically Black women, as we continue to just show up as our natural selves, to help us to heal from past trauma while simultaneously dealing with the stressors of our existing environment. One of the first things that I find important when working with clients is really helping to explain and clarifying for them how stress is affecting us physically, mentally, and emotionally. Because most of us have an idea about that, but don't truly really understand what's happening underneath. This graphic helps to explain what's actually happening in our nervous system when we experience trauma and chronic stress. So this includes all types of stress, including racial stressors. When exposed to chronic stress, we have our nervous system activated. It's our stress response system, what we call our fight, flight, and freeze system. So this is something that most of us have probably learned about sometime in school in biology or maybe intro to psychology. And activation of this system is actually affecting our brain functioning for children and for adults, affecting our brain development and neuroplasticity. And it's also affecting our hormonal and our neurotransmitter balance. There's a lot going on here when we are affected by stress. But our brain and body are being activated for survival. This flight, fight, and freeze system is really activating to help us to survive anything we perceive as a danger. So anything that could be a danger, anything that could be a threat, including microaggressions and racism. But there are consequences for continually having our stress response activated. We've got these neurotransmitters and these hormones that prepare us to fight, to freeze, to flee the scene, flowing through our bodies in ways that might not be healthy if we're not able to truly release and let go of stress. Okay? So what you see here is our autonomic nervous system. That's the part of the nervous system that just kind of does what it's supposed to do without us thinking about it, split into those two main parts, the parasympathetic and the sympathetic parts. That sympathetic part, that's what gets us activated. That's what causes our pupils to dilate and our heart rate to increase and really gets us ready for those stressors. So that's our sympathetic system, getting you ready for stress. When we really need to calm down, we need to activate our parasympathetic system. That's the system that helps us to rest, to regenerate, and to feel completely recovered from stress. The challenge is, for those of us who are dealing with chronic stressors in stressful situations or living as a Black woman in America sometimes, we constantly have the sympathetic nervous system running. And we're not getting to that point where we are able to complete the stress response. So that means we really aren't getting to that point where we can completely rest and regenerate. And having that parasympathetic response activated is what allows us to be creative, to plan in advance, to really allow our body to rest and feel healthy. And it's when we are able to really be our best selves in that state. So how do we get there? Once we have a better understanding of how we are affected by stress, it's time for us to evaluate the choices that we're making, okay? So first we have to be honest and aware of how history has affected us. So this includes our family, personal history. So some of those things that none of us really talk about, that families tend to avoid talking about. And also the history of this country. So the real history of this country, not the history that they are trying to now teach. Next is identifying and standing firm in our values. So emphasizing our values, because this is going to look very different from the values that we have been assimilated to take on as our own. So this means really taking the time to think about our values, and this is usually done in an exercise to decide what ultimately is important to us. Once we've done that, we have to focus on making choices that are in alignment with our values. And sometimes this means making some really tough decisions. It might mean leaving a toxic workplace. It might mean leaving a prestigious job, like the former president of Harvard, and leaving a high salary. Lastly is the continuous process of learning to identify and manage stress, because of course, there will always be stress in life. And the better we are at managing stress, the healthier we'll be and the healthier our families will be. So this is a general pathway and guideline. What fills your cup? So this is going to look different for everyone. I'd like you to take a look at this and kind of think about it for yourself. But this is what is going to help us to feel rejuvenated and rested. Some of these strategies that I have here are breathing, movement, meditation, prayer. For so many of us, it's music. And what we don't realize sometimes, because we're so busy, that community plays a really important part in helping us to manage stress and helping us to deal with recovering from stressors and from trauma. I'm curious to see what else we have listed. Anything else that you all can think about, please feel free to put it in the chat. Sister Audra, can you call them out if you see them? I am not able to find
Sure.
the chat.
Yeah, will do. So mindfulness, acupuncture, Eastern medicine, walking in the park, cooking, gardening, building friendships with women, good food, cooking. So rage cage, structured awareness practices, Reiki, being in nature, time by the water.
Yeah. And this is the process of really identifying our stressors and taking the time to understand how our body and mind are connected. Because it's not just talking. Sometimes it's talking, but sometimes it's really moving our body and being able to move so that the stressors and everything that happens to us biologically is able to also move through the body. When we're not able to complete the stress cycle, those hormones and neurotransmitters are staying within our body, and it does cause illness. It also causes some of the physiological challenges that many of us are dealing with. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that next. And biofeedback, I can see that now. Thank you. Glad I was able to find the chat. Okay. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about mindfulness. Somebody mentioned mindfulness, meditation, and yoga. So yoga is a mind-body strategy. It's usually attributed to ancient Indian culture. However, there are ancient African practices, including Kemetic yoga, that also emphasize the connections between our brain and our body. So as I'm discussing yoga, I'm really referring to all of those contemplative practices that include mindfulness, breath exercises, and mindful movement. There is growing research that shows the effectiveness and positive effects of yoga and mindfulness. So therefore, there are quite a few therapists that I know of that are using yoga regularly as part of their practices. because it's been shown to have a reparative effect for stress and trauma. It's regulating the function of our autonomic nervous system, that system that we just talked about, by helping us to activate that parasympathetic branch. So that branch that we really need to complete the stress cycle and to find the rest and regeneration that we need to be healthy. More specifically, yoga is regulating those hormonal systems, and it's responsible for those hormonal systems that are responsible for the interactions, for what's happening with us mentally and physically. So we have this system called the HPA axis, the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis. And you can kind of think of this as the system that bridges that gap between mind and body. And that's the system that we think is partially responsible for what happens when we feel stressed out and then begin to feel physically ill as well. That system is being regulated through yoga, through mindfulness, and through meditation. So we've got some powerful tools at hand here. Let's see. Oh, I think I wanted to say a little bit more here, because one of the other things that's important to note, some of us are yoga practitioners. I see someone saying hydration here too. Yep. Some of us are yoga practitioners, and some of us practice yoga differently. But one of the things that we realize is that yoga is not just the movement. And the movement is actually a very small part of yoga. When we think of yoga, sometimes we're thinking of the postures, but it's really not the postures on its own that create the reparative effects of yoga. It's the breathing, it's the mindfulness, it's the postures, but some newer research has also shown that it's the community. It's also that ability, when appropriate, to practice in community. To have that community around you is also a healing presence. Okay. All right. So practice regularly. Yoga has been shown to create a resilience factor for us. So it's not just one little practice here and there, but being able to practice regularly is what's really building up our resilience. Okay, so I'd like to try something with us here together. And I know a lot of us have tried breathing exercises. Some of us do this as part of our regular practice, but I'll ask that you take a moment here to practice together. And if you've got some comments or want to share a little bit about your experience, please do so when we're done. I'm gonna go back a second. Okay. So I'll go back and forth between this picture. I chose this picture specifically to give us something really nice to kind of just focus on. Some people feel really comfortable closing their eyes and focusing on absolutely nothing when using contemplative practices. Sometimes people do better with having a guided practice and having something to focus on. So I chose this picture. Hopefully it feels visually pleasing for you all. And you can take a look at it as we talk here for a second. So one of my favorite, most simple quotes about mindfulness is that it is paying attention to what's happening right now in the present moment, in your mind, in your body, and in the external environment. So also what's going on around you. But most importantly, we're doing this with an attitude of curiosity and with kindness. So not with judging, not with nitpicking about what's happening around you or even internally, but really being kind to yourself and kind to others, as well as being curious. So I want you to kind of think about that as we practice, okay? So here are some of the pointers I'd like you to think about as we're practicing this. We're going to try a really simple breathing for stress management exercise. And this is one of the ways that I like to teach to clients as well. As much as possible, we're going to try to use your nose to breathe. And imagine your belly like a beach ball. So many of us are kind of like always trying to keep the belly in and hold in those muscles tight. I'd like you to do the opposite and just kind of think of your belly as a beach ball. So that as you inhale, your belly is inflating like a beach ball, not just in the front, but you'll also notice some movement around the sides. So think about that for a moment. Try inhaling through your nose and really inflating your belly like a beach ball. Once you inhale, pause for a moment before you exhale, and then try to exhale as slowly, but also as comfortably as you can. So exhaling nice and slow. You can use your nose or your mouth, it's up to you. So imagine deflating that beach ball as you exhale. Okay? Once you figure out that movement, see if you can find a rhythm of your breath. So kind of counting in your mind how long it takes for you to comfortably inhale, taking a short pause, and then how long it takes for you to comfortably exhale. So for example, it might be maybe like 6 seconds to inhale, a 1 second pause, and then maybe 8 seconds to exhale. So those are our general principles. I'm going to keep that in mind. I'm going to guide you through a practice here. So to begin with mindfulness, you can take a look at this picture, or if you'd like to, you can go ahead and close your eyes and begin paying attention to what's happening right now in the present moment. So I want you to think about what's happening in your mind, what you're thinking about, what's happening in your body, and even what you might be hearing, smelling, or feeling in your external environment. And as you do this, you're just being curious and also kind. So even if negative thoughts come up, you're being kind to yourself and just noticing that's what it is. Next, I'll invite you to try that breath practice. Using your nose, inhaling deeply, really allowing your belly to expand. Pausing for a moment, and then releasing as slowly as you can. Imagining your belly going back. Releasing all of that air and then inhaling again. Really allowing your belly to expand. Pausing and then releasing. We'll try here to find a rhythm of your breath. So again, paying attention to about how long it takes you to inhale, pausing, and about how long it takes you to exhale. And then try to stick with that rhythm. Most importantly, making sure that your breath feels comfortable and relaxing to you. Really tuning into that breath. Maybe even noticing the sound of your breath as you breathe. I'll guide you through a quick scan here, inviting you to notice your shoulders. And if your shoulders are feeling tight as you exhale, gently releasing and relaxing them away from your ears. Then I'll invite you to bring your attention to your hands. And if they feel tight or clenched as you exhale, gently relaxing, releasing your fingers. Then I'll invite you to bring your attention to your jaw. It's a place where lots of us hold on to tightness. So sorry. So going back to breathing and relaxing as you exhale. So we'll take one more breath here. And I'll invite you to bring your awareness back to your mind, back to your body, noticing how you feel, noticing what you're thinking, noticing if there are any differences in how you felt when you first started. And then when you're ready, you can gently open your eyes. So I don't know how much of that was actually caught by everyone. I realized kind of late that I got disconnected, but I'd love to hear any responses through chat about what you all experienced with that, if it was similar to what you have tried before for breathing exercises or different. Calmness, yeah, thank you. Relaxing, awesome. And this is something that is accessible to all of us everywhere we are. So it's one of the first things that I tend to teach with um, any clients. Focus, intentional focus on the I. Okay, yeah. So if you notice calmness, you experience activation of your parasympathetic nervous system. That's exactly what happened. Breathing in a relaxed manner is one of the fastest and most accessible ways for us to activate that parasympathetic nervous system. And that's what we want to focus on. That is what happens to be missing for so many of us that are living and working in toxic environments, as Black women living in this culture where we are expected and encouraged to be something that we naturally are not. And as a result, living and working through chronic stress. And this is where we need to get back to. And this is how we get back to our natural selves. This is how we manage stress. This is how we survive and thrive if we choose to, while remaining in these environments that do not intend for us to strive, to survive and thrive. So I encourage us to really think about how we are taking care of ourselves and how we're taking care of ourselves really for us. And sometimes that sounds very selfish, I know. And for many of us, that sounds so foreign to think about ourselves first. But how we take care of ourselves for us first, in order to be available to the people that we love, and in order to maintain the health and wealth for generations to follow. Keeping in mind that end goal, that if we cannot take care of ourselves, if we're not doing well enough to maintain our own mental wellness, then there really is no hope for the generations that come behind us. And then what's all that hard work for? So as we finish up, I'd like to just encourage us all to really kind of think about how we're going to take care of the Black woman in our lives. And if you would like to get in touch, I encourage you to go ahead and send me an email if you'd like, or I can also be reached by these other ways of getting in touch. Self-care is not selfish, absolutely.
Can you share your screen?
Yes, sorry, I missed that. Hold on one second. Okay. All right. So we're right at 8. I would love to converse with you all. Any questions that you have or comments? Or anything else you'd like to add? This is definitely an interactive discussion, so I'd love to interact.
Wonderful. Well, let me first jump in and say thank you for such a beautiful presentation. And thank you for giving us that breathing technique and experience, allowing us all to feel that calmness, that relaxation, and giving us a hint of what that self-care is like. I do encourage our audience that if you have questions for Dr. Abena, please post them in the Q&A box so that we can make sure that we see your message and get that question to her. And I would like to start off with asking you, what you just shared with us was really quick. And I think that's important because a lot of times we as Black women find ourselves so busy.
Mm-hmm.
And can you speak to ways in which we can incorporate self-care into a busy, hectic schedule? And
Yeah.
and along those lines, someone mentioned self-care is not selfish. Can you
Mm-hmm.
speak to that idea that sometimes
Yes,
maybe we may feel guilty in taking care of oneself?
absolutely. I'm
What
going to turn on a
can you
light though,
address
because it's
that?
gotten really dark in here. So give me one
Sure.
sec.
Mhm.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Okay, that's better. All right. So absolutely. So yeah, people are busy. Everyone's busy. I really encourage people to utilize technology. And that can be, some people use different apps on either their cell phones or if they're wearing one of those smartwatches. Um, I don't necessarily have the iPhone package, but I do know some of the apps that are used there. So for lots of my clients, I really talk them through the different apps that they have access to already that they probably aren't even aware of. Someone earlier mentioned biofeedback, and there is an app that actually does provide biofeedback, which means that it is tracking your biological markers like your heart rate, your respiration, and giving you a cue of those markers that are telling you that maybe you need to slow down and take a breath. So when we're busy, technology really is our friend. And using some of these tools that we already have at our disposal is really what helps us and reminds us throughout the day to take a break. Even without those wearable devices that provide biofeedback, we can set alarms for ourselves. I personally have an alarm for myself to kind of remind myself to take a moment to breathe. And then we can do other little things that help us to just incorporate breathing and movement throughout our day. We are not meant to sit still. So many of us have sedentary jobs, or jobs that just kind of keep us in one place at a time. But again, that is a really unhealthy practice that makes it almost impossible for us to do what our body naturally does to relieve us of those stress hormones and to help us to complete that stress process and that stress cycle. So by sitting still in one place, we don't recognize sometimes how our emotions are going up and down throughout the day, but our body does. Our body's definitely keeping track, even if we're not personally keeping track. So even reminding yourself to take a break, to move around, to breathe, and using these different technological devices can be a way to keep track when we're busy. And then I forgot your second question. What was your second question, sis?
It was around the notion of self-care being selfish, but I
Mm-hmm.
want to say a powerful point about our bodies keeping track. of our stressors, whether we are or not, our body is. Sometimes it shows itself in dis-ease. But can you speak to the idea that self-care is selfish? And I say that because a lot of times I've heard Black women us say that, there isn't time to take care of ourselves. And like we're so busy doing for others that there's not time to really do for myself. And when we take that time, perhaps some of us do feel a sort of guilt, that I could be using this energy, this time for something else or someone else. So if you could speak to that.
I encourage folks to think of the consequences. And unfortunately, some of us learn the hard way. Raise your hand if that's you. I think it's most of us at some point in time. But that's also a part of my job and my role, is keeping track and holding folks accountable and reminding people of what actually is the consequence when we're not taking care of ourselves. It absolutely is not selfish to care for ourselves and to prioritize ourselves as much as is appropriate. Some of us have small kids, and of course, we've got to make sure that they're okay. They can't take care of themselves. But we must, at the risk of dealing with really serious consequences sometimes, prioritize our own wellness. Sometimes that means just taking a lunch break. Sometimes that means taking the time to stay at home if we have a really busy schedule and we can just decide to opt out of things. But it looks different for everyone. I encourage us all to take the time and really explore what it looks like for you, because it might look different for you compared to what it looks like for me. And it might look different today compared to what it looked like yesterday. But it's that idea of honoring ourselves and recognizing and being able to pivot and respond to whatever we happen to need in the present moment. So it's definitely not selfish. And sometimes we just have to recognize what the consequences are to encourage ourselves to do what we need to do to keep healthy.
Okay. Oh, were you going to say something? I wanted to get to another.
No, I was actually looking at the chat as well. Yep.
Okay. So
Absolutely.
I'm going to take a question from Helen, who asks, what are your thoughts on feel more and think less?
Yeah. I think that can be interpreted a couple of different ways, but the way I'm interpreting it, and you can tell me if this is in alignment with what you're thinking, is that sometimes we really do just need to listen to our bodies. And sometimes that is not what we logically think we're supposed to do. However, like I mentioned before, our bodies are quite intelligent. We have been created in this perfect way for our ultimate survival and well-being. And sometimes what we think is right is not necessarily what our body actually needs. And sometimes it might not feel logical, but it's really what our body needs. And so that's where it makes sense to really kind of pay attention to what you're feeling, pay attention to what's actually happening in your body, rather than relying on what's happening cognitively and what you think is happening logically. Helen, is that kind of what you were thinking? You can let us know.
Okay, our next question, while Helen is responding, our next question comes from AJ. And AJ asks, I understand the need for personal self-care, but I wonder about our need to exist in health and functional cultural systems. What are your thoughts on the need for cultural rehabilitation for our deeper healing and health? And then yeah, so we can go with that one. Then I'll come back to the second question.
So cultural rehabilitation, and that sounds like really paying attention to how we're doing as a culture and collectively to be well, not just individually, but collectively, which I absolutely do believe should be a priority for us. And I imagine that, again, I wish I could actually talk to you. I believe I like the term cultural rehabilitation. Yep. I believe that can be thought of in a couple of different ways. And right now, it feels like we're in this time, which I think is a wonderful time, where we're so connected by social media, where we can connect to people all over the world and really be able to understand how we define our culture as people as African descent, and really reclaim our culture of people of African descent, with far fewer barriers that would have been in the way prior to social media and the internet the way we have it now. And it feels like this is a prime time for us to kind of think about and redefine um, who we are as a people and where we will be going right now in this very opportune time for rehabilitation.
Awesome. And Helen did say amen to your comment. So your response did touch upon what she was
Okay,
thinking.
great.
So I do want to read a comment from Dr. India. She asks, or she states, I have had many patients who were C-suite Black professionals and oftentimes wealthy women of color who have embodied a sense of no one is looking out for me but me type of mentality, which causes them to isolate away from the tribe, community, and opportunities to heal.
Yeah.
Working to survive and keeping busy also becomes a maladaptive means to take care of themselves because no one else will. From a professional lens, how do we gain greater access in getting in front of our Black women to help them prioritize self-care?
Yeah. I've had similar experiences with some of the women I've had the opportunity and honor to work with. And that really is their reality. What I found is that often women in that position, they have gone through a lot to get to where they are. Some of them have sometimes there's a survivor's guilt because they have overcome lots of challenges and happen to be either leaving family behind who have not quite obtained the what they have obtained in life. And that also leads to that sense of isolation because they really do feel like they're on their own, and sometimes don't even feel as if their family is able to connect to them in the ways that they really need to be connected to. I guess this also gets back to the other question and comment that someone made about our collective healing and our cultural healing, because these are like real issues that so many of us are presenting with, and what it actually means to be quote unquote successful in this society, but not feel like you have the community that you really need to support your well-being in the positions that you're in. And I feel that that's really a huge risk to so many of us. People who are in positions of success are actually many times they end up being gatekeepers. We kind of want them to be there because they help the rest of us to kind of get in there. They're the only ones that look like us, that might look at our resume or might speak up for us in an interview. We want these people to be healthy. We want them, we need all of us everywhere we are to be healthy. And so we need to be able to find a way and a place to support everyone. For this particular group of women who I think you're saying they're isolating away from the tribe, we need to find the tribe that fits them. And so that means that sometimes the tribe that you are with right now might not be able to support you, but there are people out there. There are people like there are other Black women in those positions who can support you, who can understand you, and can provide that community that you need to sustain where you are. and still be who you are and be the best at what you are.
Awesome,
That
thank
was
you.
helpful.
Here's a two-part question. I'm going to combine these two. AJ asked, could you give us some other signs of the parasympathetic nervous system being activated?
Mhm.
And then to follow up on that, could you talk about the role of adopting diets or eating food that supports the parasympathetic nervous system, like anti-inflammatory foods, easy to digest foods, fresh fruit, etc.?
So let me try to answer the first question. When I know my parasympathetic nervous system is activated, when I go to sleep, I actually wake up feeling rested. I actually feel rested. I wake up like I actually slept. And I know lots of us go to sleep and we wake up and we're like, did we actually sleep? Because it doesn't really feel like it. I'm also able to plan for the future. I'm not just in this moment trying to survive in this particular moment. I'm able to sit back and actually think about plans for the future, and I can be creative about those plans. So that's why it's so important, because if we're not in that state of mind where that part of our brain and our nervous system is being activated, we're really not able to tap into our greatest selves. We're really just kind of surviving. But when you notice that particular sensation where you are able to think deeper and it doesn't feel like it's stress induced, you're not thinking to survive, you're thinking to actually plan and to live out to your greatest potential, then that's when you're most likely in your parasympathetic state. Some of us feel this way after meditation. Again, some of us feel this way after a really good night of rest, like a real restful sleep. Some of us feel this way after yoga class. I know sometimes I feel like $1,000,000 after yoga class, but that's a general sense of what it feels like and how you actually know. Anti-inflammatory foods, definitely. Making those decisions for our bodies, again, thinking about what our bodies need, not always, it doesn't always seem logical, but kind of listening to your body and figuring out what your body needs at that time. And of course, eating natural, eating healthy foods will help us to have the most and the best way to manage stress.
Awesome. And again, audience, we're going to take about a few more minutes for Q&A. So if you do have a question, we ask that you get in to our Q&A box so that we
Thank you
can
so much for your
present it.
questions. I
Yes.
see Lowell says that he uses the stack breathing technique 5-5-5 to clear his mind and to feel more sensation, warmth, reduction of pain. That's great.
And it's funny because Lowell's actually the next question that we have up.
Oh, okay.
Awesome. That is so wonderful. I love the alignment. So Lowell asks, can you give your insight on the sexual and reproductive health of African American women? What it has been further compromised due to multiple experiences of racism, to include discriminatory healthcare practices from slavery through the post-civil rights era.
Well, that's quite a question. Let me see if I can start from the top. From the top, we were brought to this country to breed and to breed free labor. That in itself, and that expectation in itself, in many ways, continues to influence how we're seen and, unfortunately, how we see ourselves in a lot of situations. So the images that we see in over-sexualization of Black women is not by accident. That is completely intentional and completely based on what was expected of us and what was hoped of us, and when this country was created, to be able to breed, and breeding means that there is a perpetual supply of free labor for this country to build wealth for itself. So that sexualization of Black women is intentional. And unfortunately, through so many different means, we've come to adopt that idea of over-sexualization of our young girls and of ourselves in some ways through the images, through the media, through so many different ways that we are exposed to it, even in our youth. And so that in effect is hopefully the first part of your question. And I think I need to go back and read the second part of the question. Let me see. Is it still in here, Sister
Yeah.
Oswald?
Under the Q&A.
Oh,
Logan
hold on.
asked
Sorry,
you
I'm in the
that.
wrong window. Here we go.
Mhm.
Mm-hmm. And then I guess we all can kind of think about what's happening now as far as mortality, maternal mortality for women of childbearing age. We're not receiving the type of health care that we deserve. And this is unfortunately resulting in a high mortality rate for us as we go in to have babies. There are definitely studies that show that when we have Black doctors, when we're trying to deliver, the women who are delivering and the babies have a much higher rate of survival. Simple as that. So that expectation, that representation of having someone who looks like you, looking out for you, really does make a difference.
Awesome.
Hope
Thank
that
you.
answers your question.
Lowell says thank you for speaking truth to power. So yes, I'm going to ask this question. I'm going to kind of reword it a little bit, but someone wants to know about the impact of technology as being a source of excessive stress on our nervous system. Can you speak a little bit about that
I can, yeah.
and how we
I'm
can combat
going
that?
to try not to offend anyone, but we really have to be careful with social media. We really have to be careful with social media. Um, Social media can be such a wonderful tool. Like I mentioned before, we're able to connect in ways that we were not able to connect before. And also, there are clear studies and evidence that social media is really taking a toll on our mental health. And it's not just for the kids. Some of you may know that some of the local school districts have opened up legal claims on some of the social media platforms and apps because they found evidence that the more their students are using social media, the more their students are experiencing depression and anxiety. So the school systems are suing them. But it's not just for kids. Think about it for yourself, honestly, how you feel when you're using social media. If it's always good, because this is part of mindfulness, really paying attention to what's happening in the present moment without judgment. Because if we're judging ourselves, it's going to be really hard to be honest. But what I ask people to do is be honest about how you're actually feeling as you're scrolling through Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, Snapchat. If you can honestly say you're feeling good, there's no emotional roller coaster for you, fine. But that's not the majority of us. Many of us are feeling ups and downs in just 5 or 10 minutes. And what we're understanding now is that is also intentional. That's the way the social media platforms work. They study exactly what you are clicking on, what you're looking at, how long you're looking at it, and then they give you another video to keep you looking and scrolling. And so I ask people to be honest about this because as hard as it is, if you're realizing that it's impacting you emotionally and mentally, if you're noticing that you're feeling both anxiety and sadness and happiness and jealousy, lots of times envy, then it really is best to take a break. Sometimes technology can be great, and sometimes it's not our friends.
Great, thank you. So we're going to begin to close out. And as we're closing out, I do want to ask one final question or perhaps advice or takeaway. As we think about mental health and Black women, and really this could apply to women, men, and children. Um, how do we create that alignment of mind, body, and spirit? So when we're at the workplace or we're on the go, can you leave us with 3 quick tips or 3 easy strategies that are easy to remember that can allow us to create that realignment that we may need in that moment?
Mhm. Um, First and foremost, remember your own personal spiritual practice, whatever it happens to be, however you define it, and don't skip it. Even if you're rushing out the door, take your time to start your day that way. I'm a firm believer that starting your day with intention makes a big difference. I'm also a CBT practitioner, so that is part of the teaching that is very much in alignment with cognitive behavioral therapy. Starting your day, starting anything that you do with intention makes a difference. And then going back again to defining our own values and really emphasizing how those values are going to look different from the values of the people that you come across every day. So taking the time to understand what's really most important to you and checking in with yourself regularly to make sure that you are acting in accordance to your values. And then again, taking that time to take a pause. So, using these contemplative practices is something that's best done throughout the day. So, not waiting until the stress of the day has built up and you are ready to go home and do something that might not be so healthy, but taking the time throughout the day to check in with yourself, using some of those technological tools that we talked about earlier to help keep yourself on track, and making sure that you are taking the time to take care of yourself throughout the day, not waiting until your body absolutely screams, but listening out for those whispers and listening out for those little signs that your body is giving you to let you know what it actually needs.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that. Very enlightening presentation,
Thank you.
powerful reminders. Love the idea of being intentional and checking in with ourselves, hearing the whispers of our bodies, of our spirit, of our mind, of ourselves, letting us know how to remain healthy. Thank you so much
Thank
for
you.
those key takeaways. On the screen here, you all see how to get in touch with Dr. Abena Brown El Halali. So please feel free to reach out to her for more information. And we thank you for joining us tonight. We invite you back out next month, the third Wednesday of the month, May 15th, for our next Wisdom Wednesday, which will feature Wakesa Mazimoyo, and he'll be speaking on the novelist as healing guide. Araba's J's 7-step healing process for parents, teachers, and our youth. So, a great continuation from tonight's discussion. Again, if you would like to learn more about IKG, please go to ikgculturalresourcecenter.com, where you can learn more about our programming, including our Wisdom Wednesday lecture series and the Egypt on the Potomac field trip series. And that season, again, is open. Tickets are available. They do sell out, so we encourage you to purchase your tickets now. You can attend the public field trips, or if you have a group, you may organize and schedule a private field trip. And before we say our final good evenings for the night, Dr. Brown and Halali, is there any closing remarks that you would like to share with the audience?
I just want to thank each of you for your participation. I really, again, enjoyed the conversation and the interaction, and I wish everyone health and blessings, and take care of yourselves.
Wonderful. Well, thank you all, family, for joining us. Have a great rest of your week and a beautiful month, and we will see you next time. Be
Thank
blessed.
you.